Hi everyone, my name is Adam Beck. I'm Executive Director of the Smart Cities Council for Australia and New Zealand, and we bring here another episode of Digital Twin Sessions, episode, I think it's number 5. And joining me today, our guest is Caruana-McManus from Meshed IoT. Catherine, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Let's start with the pleasantries. Your bio. Who are you and what do you do?
Well, I am a co-founder of an Australian-based Internet of Things integrator, Meshed. I'm also a founder or co-founder of the Internet of Things Alliance Australia. And my background over the last 30 years has started off in urban planning, but moved very quickly into digital. So I've worked for major telcos and as well as government in really enabling digital connectivity. So very passionate about smart cities. And in the last 5 years, I've been very deep in the Internet of Things and more recently looking at IoT for good. So looking at the way in which IoT provides public value.
I love that. We're going to sort of get into the world of IoT and its intersection with digital twin today. Let's, however, do a check-in on all things COVID-19 pandemic craziness that's going on in this world. Can you give me a sense of what's going on in your space at the moment during this very challenging but interesting time? Is there interest in IoT? Are cities listening? What's happening? What are you seeing?
Well, fortunately, we're in the technology sector, so we're going to fare much better or well than entertainment and food and that services industry sector. We are doing really well. We moved pretty quickly to work from home, and we have very resilient systems in our operations. So we run network as a service. So it's really important for us that our customers aren't interrupted in the ongoing managed network that we provide to them, as well as their solutions, their Internet of Things solutions. So we've had to do some adjustments, like moving warehouses to people's homes because they've still got to move and ship and dispatch equipment. A bit of a challenge in terms of supply, but we're doing all right. We've got really good relationships with our suppliers. And just in terms of the energy and the amount of inquiry that we've now had from our existing customers as well as new customers, it has been quite amazing. There's been, the penny has dropped to a lot of our clients that this Internet of Things, which is just for those people who, aren't aware of it, is, the ability to connect, anything, an asset, could be a bin, a lighting controller or a flood monitor on a river to the internet to get data. The councils that we've been working with have realised this is very interesting in terms of being able to remotely monitor assets and places. And even we've been doing a lot of work in pedestrian counting, which I'll share with you in a minute. They've realised this is a very powerful capability that they've got for more targeted resource management, which in a time of crisis is really critical because they've got occupational health and safety, reasons of why they're sending grounds people out to check on things while they're going out and, distributing services. So it's been a realization that actually IoT, this remote condition monitoring, this ability to get data off assets in near real time is a very powerful tool for optimization, resource management and efficiencies. So it's been a very, very interesting time for us.
Do you think we're going to come through the end of this with a new appreciation for data?
Totally. And what's really interesting in parallel with the ability to get data has also been the pivoting that's been occurring in industries. So just this morning, I was reading with great interest this local company in Ballarat that have traditionally been providing engineering equipment to the mining and resources sector. They've pivoted and have now produced 1,000 ventilators for the Victorian Government of Health. So, this is about data. It's about understanding, what essential equipment's required in order for us to, manage the pandemic, do the testing, make sure people are safe, and then the ability, for Australia to step up. And I think it's really amazing, the amazing stories that I'm seeing and reading about companies who've been in the engineering and technology space, applying that for the public good. And I think that's very commendable.
Yeah, I've sort of observed myself some amazing sort of pivots and transitions that have gone on, and the level of entrepreneurship has been quite staggering. So topic for today: IoT and digital twin. Let's start sort of high, and then we'll dig down. Let's kick off with kind of, what is your view, Catherine, of the value of the digital twin? Let's sort of start high level. What is it to you? What's the value of it? Why would one want to do one?
People sort of immediately think of a digital twin as being like a digital representation of something physical. That's fine, but that's not the story. It's what you're doing with that data that's the real kicker here. So if you're able to use data in near real time or real time off a physical asset to do things like risk mitigation, operational efficiency, understanding performance, resource, capability, materials, that's really powerful. It's the sexy stuff that you actually do with the data. That's the really compelling reason why the digital twin is so important. And that could be applying, for example, machine learning or artificial intelligence or predictive capability, and then visualizing that, in a way that's consumable and accessible. So, we've all got one of these, and it's the ability to, take that to this sort of form and enable people to interact with the data. So that's my take. And in the past, we were reliant on these very clunky, proprietary, one-way models where, you'd put in a work order to get information of what was happening in an asset, and it would take someone, a couple of days, maybe in a couple of hours on Excel spreadsheets and be able to get that. The second, I think, kicker for the digital twin is the understanding of the life cycle management of an asset. And this asset could be a river system. Okay, so let's think about assets of things that may not necessarily be a building or a railway. It could be a creek system that, for example, the local council wants to rejuvenate so that people can in the future go fishing or swimming. Right, so it's that capability of being able to understand over the life cycle of that asset. The design, the build, the operate, and all that, the capability of that data coming through. And I think that's something that I think is also very, very relevant in this time, given the fact that, things have changed where in the past we were very much focused on a, capital expenditure model. Now we're moving to an operational expenditure. And so, governments are looking for savings. They're looking for the TCO over the life of the project, and therefore a digital twin helps them with that.
I want to, before we get down into sort of IoT plugging into the digital twin, can we do a very quick sort of backcast into sort of maybe the last, let's just call it sort of 5 years, 7 years, and quickly, can I get you to share the evolution of IoT? Let's talk about urban IoT in cities, and sensors and what we could sense. What could we sense now that we weren't or weren't? We didn't have the technology 4 or 5 years ago. Can you give me a sense of time and evolution in the idea of sensing and gathering data within sort of the urban environment? Has it been not much has changed, everything's changed? Give me a sense of 5 years.
Well, actually, it was probably about 5 years ago that the Array of Things in Chicago kicked off. So the Array of Things was probably, one of the first, I suppose, recognised hyper-localised sensing projects in the city that got some recognition. At the same time, Meshed and the University of Technology started working with the Things Network. This is 4 years ago now. And of course, the technology for urban livability, Tulip, has just gone hugely successful. I'll talk about that in a minute. But if we look back, say, 4 or 5 years ago, MIT were really looking at the Internet of Things. And, this was at the same time with the Ciscos and the IBMs. And of course, looking at digital twin and IoT, the work that GE did, for example, on their Boeing engines and being able to get a digital DNA of that. So, if you look at those sorts of projects, 5 years ago, costs were still pretty high. The cost of people were still tinkering. They were actually physically, pulling together components for these sophisticated air quality sensors and things like that. And that's still very important. But, 4 years, 5 years on, costs have come down. There's much more readily availability of devices, particularly more sophisticated scientific devices, at a much lower cost than they were, to the average, personal researcher out there wanting to consume it. The other thing too that's happened, which has been very exciting, and it's been a path that I've been involved in, has been the proliferation of alternative communication networks to be able to sense data. So, my background, as everybody knows, I've been in the telco and IT space for 30 years and worked for, major telcos. And, there really was, very, very much these two worlds of what we would call proprietary telemetry, right? So, a very point-to-point telemetry systems, or there's like the cellular. And of course, what's happened in the last 5 years, we've seen these low-power, long-range networks that have become quite ubiquitous, particularly the birth of the Things Network, which is a decentralized open source capability on using the secure LoRaWAN standard. So we've seen that. And then at the same time, though, Adam, and you've been part of this journey, there's been this maturity of cities and industries understanding data frameworks and smart cities. And so the work, for example, that was done years ago in London with the UK government, where they categorised data, right, into the data frameworks of what was it, open, shared, private, geospatial, sensor data. And that's really helped cities and industries in the infrastructure space to start to feel more comfortable, right, with this concept of the Internet of Things and how smart cities and data and tech can help them. And then the other thing too that's happened in the last 5 years has been an appreciation of standards.
Yeah. So
in the past, standards were relating to, here's a good one. There is a standard on a spoon.
Yeah.
Okay, there's, right, a physical thing, but now we have a very strong appreciation globally, led by people like IEEE, NIST, BSI, around sustainability, smart cities. And I think those are the tool sets that have brought things together to now create an environment where we can start to look at mass scale sensing networks relatively, very much more efficiently and effectively, and do that in a way that's going to protect, concerns around privacy and data use and support interoperability.
We have there, almost an evolution of IoT, which is going to keep going, which is kind of, in terms of what we can sense, it's restricted by your imagination virtually at the moment, and we're only going to see that play out. So let's sort of bring these two things together at the moment. I think more and more, and as you sort of firmly confirmed in your opening there with the value of the digital twin, that we realize this is a data play. This is about data and what we do with it and what we can do with it. We can light it up visually. We can test it. We can push it here, see where it pokes there, and scenario test. I was recently doing some very light touch research, going back to sort of the history of digital twin, and it's been around for a while. NASA
Mm-hmm.
with the lunar
Yeah.
module or whatever it was, and I can imagine it would have been, punch cards and kind of, a bit more analog than what we have today. But I imagine that those that sort of create a digital twin platform going forward, when you sort of plug the internet into it like a pipe, I mean, what comes down that and what sort of lights up is just going to become incredible. Talk to me about what you see as potentially the real core opportunities with plugging the internet into a digital twin and therefore feeding it with the most amazing insights that we're able to sense these days. Give me a sense of what's exciting you. What do you think is going to be really valuable?
Well, I think the first starting point is that it's completely under debate. Even today, we still don't have an appreciation by spatial experts, by governments, by infrastructure providers that real-time data is part of that story. So let me give you an example. Let's look at the New South Wales digital twin, the spatial digital twin that's been launched in partnership with the New South Wales government, the New South Wales Sensing Network, and Data 61. When you go to that spatial portal, you'll see that when they look at real-time data, there's only two data sets there. There's the transport data set, which is the train network, which is simply just incorporated existing train and transport scheduling. And then the only other one there is air quality. The challenge with that is that air quality network that's there is only reporting on the 5 stations that are put out across the city by the Environmental Protection Authority. That's not near real-time data. That's not enough capability at the granularity level of understanding how we actually, and the interesting thing is when you look at that digital twin, it's amazing. It's got this 3-4D, cadastre coming out, at you on the screen. Yet what if we could, at the street level, tell everybody that's looking at that what temperature it is at street level, how many people are walking past that particular building, what noise levels are happening, what the air quality is happening, around that, how many transactions have occurred in the last 15 minutes. And that sort of information is really important, particularly to cities, because cities are trying to drive a transfer of value, right? They've got the responsibility of ensuring they deliver services, and they're very limited in terms of their revenue through things such as rates. But if they can do economic development to attract more businesses and they have that data, that's very powerful. So I think that's just, the reality is that there's a lot of focus on the digital twin, and rightly so, being around the life cycle management of an asset. It tends to be very much entrenched in the infrastructure building framework, particularly public assets or public infrastructural buildings. But there's absolutely no conversation happening about how those other crowdsourced, more ubiquitous real-time sensing networks can actually play into the digital twins that have been created by the Queensland government, New South Wales government, and Victoria. And I think one of the challenges we have is that digital twins requires collaboration, and so it's important for intergovernment collaboration to occur, but there really is no engagement or not enough dialogue with what the private sector can actually bring to this discussion. And when I look at my own story with what we're doing with the Things Network, which is this, public access capability for cities, councils, environmentalists, people who are doing building management, companies that are doing BMS, environmental sensing, things like that. That's a story that could all come together. But at the moment, it needs to be unlocked. And I think this piece around collaboration, that needs to happen. Otherwise, we run the risk of then relying on what I would say quite dated, static, not very dynamic data sets, which really aren't telling the entire story.
Let me switch to some horizontal issues for a moment. Brain hemorrhaging issues like governance and capability and resources and things like that. So like you, the New South Wales spatial digital twin is incredible. You know, like you look at it, you can fly around it, and I just think, I mean, the table is now set for the most amazing sort of life to come up out of it. But that's a heavy lift, right? I mean, local authorities that may not be, you know, digital literate or really sort of have the capability or capacity. Not every local authority, you know, has a data science or a chief data officer, you know, that capability. Let's just talk about local government for a moment. Where are we at, and how are we as a collective of municipalities going to come on board and sort of value this opportunity and sort of make it real? You know, are there any particular challenge or barriers you think are the priorities we need to sort of bust down or break open? What's your view on that, this sort of the doing part?
Look, I do agree with you there. I think that there's still a massive education, requirement to help local government understand what is already available. I think that a lot of practitioners in local government, and look, you and I, we both come from the planning fraternity, and I would just openly state that the planning fraternity are just not on board with digital. And it's not that they're not interested, it's just the mechanisms there of including them in the conversations that are also occurring with the IT department or the assets department. You know, this is where this collaboration needs to occur. So absolutely, we need to get better at cross, fertilization of the ideas around how data, digital, IoT, digital twin can actually help the urban planner and the people dealing with how we actually use land and how do we provision for that. That's the first thing. The second thing is that with the rise of standards and frameworks, that we do actually have that capacity. And I think it's a really concerted effort of industry associations such as Smart Cities Council, such as the Internet of Things Alliance Australia, to broker those conversations with those key leaders in government and in local government, to share with them, to say, yes, look, we may be sitting out there sometimes in the private sector, and yes, we've got vested interests, but actually, if we start to look at what we've got, a common ground, the common language, which are the standards, which have been really well published, then we can start to have a more adult conversation about data use, and the reducing the risk then of them being able to launch or really start to deliver on Internet of Things. Let me just give you a quick summary that, since we started the business 4 years ago, we went from 4 cities, we're now 48 cities. In 2 years, we've gone from 4 cities deploying these LoRaWAN networks on the Things network now to 48. So there's a hunger there. And the thing that's really interesting is that the really exciting thing that's come out of that process has been the number of use cases that have come out of conversations happening within councils to say, how can we get more data to solve this problem? It could be someone sitting in parks and gardens who's worrying about an asset, a tree, right? How do we monitor the performance and the health of this tree? And that, City of Melbourne did a great job years ago of allocating an email address to every single street tree, right? Awesome stuff. Great. So how do we take that to the next level? How does that tree then talk to you? The email address is fantastic, but what's that tree sensing? How many people are standing under that tree today? What's the canopy, stress happening on that tree at the time? And we can get this sort of data. So I think there's definitely an awareness awakening, but there's a lot more work to be done. But I will also say that the work that's been done by the various state governments' offices of data, so the chief digital or data officers, they've got really important roles to play, and I think they've been instrumental in providing a vehicle for that. But if I was to look at governance, you asked me specifically around governance, in Australia, one of the challenges we have is we've got the federal government, we've got the state, and we've got the local government. And in the different states, there is varying levels of local government support and collaboration for them to be able to interface and influence the state and federal policy. So that's an opportunity. And the cities that we're working with are those that are saying, we're not going to ask, we want to lead. We're going to trial. We're going to do by design. We're going to get out there and launch proof of concepts and learn from that, because they're so hungry for the capacity for them to be able to get this data, which can help them then, share that with the community, so that it makes sense why someone's saying, well, why did the council go and put, that bubbler over there when, it's obvious that more people are coming, so it's all those sorts of things that they can better affect through that capability and collaboration.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question about, still on the theme of governance. You've been doing some interesting work in South Australia that I've been observing on the sideline. And the Smart Cities Council is a very big advocate in this idea of demand aggregation, and sort of moving forward with your friends, sharing risk and scaling and economies of scale and things like that. And from a digital twin perspective, we hear and we see efforts globally that are sort of curiously different. So the UK is advancing through the Centre for Digital Built Britain this idea of a national digital twin. New Zealand is sort of talking about this idea of a national digital twin. Australia's a little bit fragmented. We don't have any national leadership on digital twin yet. A little bit at state level, and sort of local councils are talking about it. But surely we're getting to a better place when we've got the likes of those local authorities that you're working with in South Australia, where you have neighbours, jurisdictions, cross-jurisdiction effort in terms of collecting data, sharing data, and lessons learned. I mean that's kind of music to my ears in terms of sort of, building digital twin capability, at scale, which intuitively sounds like a great approach. Talk to me about that idea of that cross-jurisdiction issue. Is this a one-off anomaly? Is it something that we're going to be able to build on elsewhere?
We're going to build on it elsewhere. So you're referring to the Connected Cities Adelaide project, which was 5 councils originally getting together to pool together all of their money and resources through the Smart Cities and Suburbs program to build a very large metro-wide IoT network using LoRaWAN and the Things network. That network now is supporting hundreds of use cases. It started off with 5 councils and is now expanded now to another 4 councils. So we've now got 9 councils covering, the network is now covering 85% of the entire Adelaide metro area.
Wow.
So that's an example where one council spoke to another council. They said, look, we don't have the resources. Some of these councils are really tiny, some of them are large. And so they pooled their resources. Now, this same principle is playing out right now in Western Sydney. So we're involved in the Sydney Water Corporation are actually sponsoring a very large LoRaWAN network across Western Sydney. They started with their own requirement of a private network, and Meshed delivered that private network on LoRaWAN for Liverpool District, and that was part of their infrastructure assets trial. And they saw the value of the fact that we could actually, using the same network infrastructure, we could put up more gateways across Western Sydney, and they could be used for the councils at no cost. So that's what we call network peering, where the council uses the network at no cost, putting on their applications. So essentially we've got the 8 councils involved, and we've been working really closely with Wollondelly and all of them to make this happen. The model there, though, is really interesting. That's where a major agency sees the value in infrastructure sharing. So it's an infrastructure sharing model where the agency is saying, we will actually fund the infrastructure and the ongoing capability and operational costs of the infrastructure in exchange for the cities being able to use that infrastructure so that they can get data and they can share the data. And the use cases that are important to Sydney Water and to these councils are water quality, as in not potable water supply, but water quality in rivers and creekways and things like that. Urban heat. Urban heat is a major challenge for Western Sydney. And of course, that relates to the water life cycle, right? As people get hotter, they obviously need more water, and they need things like air conditioning, and all of that happens. Air quality, which is very much also related to urban heat. People counting. understanding where, they're sweating assets, where there's facilities that are being highly used, areas that are underutilized, or what are we doing about urban revitalization, environmental, what are they calling it, environmental repatriation and things like that. So that model is definitely alive and well. And that data that's coming off that sensing network in Western Sydney is the intention is for that to feed into the New South Wales digital twin.
Perfect.
Right?
Yeah.
So we've got a platform now to be able to get that data and then create a digital twin of Western Sydney, which is looking obviously at its current state. But as I said earlier, the value of a digital twin is that you can put smarts over it. So your machine learning, your predictive capability to then forecast, usage, demand, all of those things, which are very important for a water authority trying to supply, its community, both industrial, residential, commercial, as well as the cities themselves, who are very high users of water, but also have to service their community with parks and gardens and, community health centres and things like that.
Okay, last question. We're almost at time. It's an interesting one given the world that we live in, but what are you looking forward to for the remainder of 2020?
We're looking forward to getting to a point where we can say we've actually built a ubiquitous, managed, free-to-access IoT network across Australia. And we're going to achieve that. And that's really exciting because it just opens up the opportunity to not just unlock the economic capability of cities, but regions. So what I'm looking forward to is if there's one thing that we've learned through the bushfire crisis and with COVID-19 is the amazing capability that we have also within regions. And I think one of the challenges with the Digital Twin Initiative is it's very, city-centric. I think there's a great opportunity for us to broaden that out into economic zones and transport hubs in regions and things like that. I think the other thing too that I'm really looking forward to is hopefully not having to explain what the digital twin is. I'd like to think that you and I are pretty much redundant on this discussion in 6 or 12 months' time because it will be embedded, in the thinking, and particularly real-time data will be part of that, design and build. We get it at the owner and operate, but let's get it into the planning stage.
Absolutely. Well, I share that optimism with you. Catherine Caruana-McManus, thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you for your time. Thanks, Adam. Ciao.